The world once saw Margaret Holloway as the CEO who had everything except love. Years of loss had kept her heart guarded, until one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Ethan, a young man with a bold heart, stepped into her life, and suddenly, the walls she built around herself began to crumble. Now, everything she thought she knew about love, about life, is being rewritten. Let's go back to how it all started. Margaret Holloway, at 68, had long since closed the door on love. After losing her husband years ago, she convinced herself that love was a chapter she would never revisit. Her life was now confined to the company she had built. Her days filled with meetings and decisions that no longer felt meaningful. But one rainy afternoon, Margaret's assistant asked her to meet with Ethan, a young, ambitious 32-year-old brought on to help with some tech work. Margaret, reluctant to meet anyone, especially someone so much younger, almost canceled the appointment. But something made her agree. Ethan arrived, soaked from the rain, a nervous but genuine smile on his face. He didn't see Margaret as the CEO. He saw her as a person, someone who had built an empire but carried a burden of loss. His words, simple but filled with sincerity, reached her in a way nothing had in years. "You've given so much to everyone else," he said, "but I think you deserve to find something for yourself too. It's not too late for love, Margaret." In that moment, Margaret realized she had been holding her heart captive for far too long. Ethan's words ignited a spark of hope that had been buried beneath years of grief. She hadn't expected it, didn't even know she was ready. But the possibility of love, of living again, stirred within her. As the rain continued to fall, Margaret found herself opening up, not just to Ethan, but to the idea that love didn't have to look the way it once had. It could take new forms, new shapes, and it could still fill her life with meaning. The days following their brief encounter left Margaret with a strange, unfamiliar feeling. She couldn't quite place it, but there was an energy inside her that had been dormant for years. She found herself thinking about Ethan often, recalling his nervous smile, the way his words seemed to reach deep into her soul. She wondered if he truly saw her, not just the CEO of a successful company, but the woman who had lost so much and built her life around work. Margaret was no stranger to resilience, yet she had always pushed aside her own needs, focusing solely on the empire she had built. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if there could be room for someone else in her world. It wasn't until a week later, when she ran into Ethan in the company lobby, that the spark he ignited began to catch fire. He was holding a stack of papers, looking a little more relaxed than the first time they met. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment time seemed to slow down. Ethan smiled at her, a smile that seemed to say more than just a casual greeting. "I was hoping to catch you," he said, stepping closer. "I finished the project you asked for. I thought you might want to take a look." Margaret nodded, but it wasn't the project that caught her attention. It was the way Ethan spoke to her, the ease in his voice, the genuine interest he had in her beyond her title. She could feel the weight of her walls starting to crumble. As they walked toward her office, Margaret found herself asking more personal questions than she ever had before. She learned about Ethan's dreams, his childhood, and the places he wanted to visit someday. His laughter was contagious, his sincerity disarming. In that moment, Margaret realized how much she had missed the simple connection with another person. By the time they reached her office, she was already looking forward to their next conversation. What had started as a casual meeting with a young man had become something she hadn't expected, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as she watched Ethan leave her office that day, Margaret couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity, and perhaps the first stirrings of something more. The following days were filled with subtle shifts. Margaret found herself looking forward to the small interactions with Ethan, whether it was a quick email exchange or a brief chat in the hallway. The more they spoke, the more she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years. She shared stories of her late husband, of the sacrifices she had made for her company, and of the quiet loneliness she had carried with her. Ethan listened with a compassion that surprised her. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity. He simply accepted her, and in that acceptance, Margaret felt a kind of peace she hadn't known she needed. For the first time in a long time, she realized she could allow someone in, without fear of losing herself or being consumed by the past. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Margaret found herself alone in her office. It had been raining again, the gentle rhythm of the drops against the windows calming her mind. She gazed out at the city, lost in thought, when a soft knock on the door broke her reverie. "Can I come in?" Ethan's voice was warm, like it had become over the past few weeks. Margaret smiled, a hint of surprise in her expression. She hadn't expected him to seek her out after hours. "Of course," she said, her voice softening as he stepped into the room. Ethan held a cup of coffee in his hands, offering it to her with a smile. "I thought you might need a break," he said gently. Margaret took the cup, her fingers brushing his as she did. The warmth from the coffee seeped into her, but it was the warmth of his gesture that made her pause. She could feel the connection between them deepening, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it, if she was ready to embrace what was slowly unfolding. "You're the first person who's ever truly listened to me," Margaret said, her voice quieter than she intended. "It's not easy to let go of the past." Ethan's gaze softened. "You don't have to let go of everything," he said, "but you deserve to feel joy again. Maybe we can find a way to share that joy together." Margaret's heart fluttered at his words. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than duty, responsibility, and sorrow. She saw the possibility of something new, something that wasn't bound by the past. But it wasn't just Ethan's words that spoke to her. It was the sincerity in his eyes, the way he made her feel seen and valued, not as a CEO, but as the woman she was. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside Margaret's heart, something was changing. Slowly but surely, she was beginning to understand that love, in all its forms, could still find a place in her life. The weeks passed, each day weaving a deeper connection between Margaret and Ethan. The lines between professional and personal became blurrier with every conversation, every shared moment. They met often, sometimes for work, but more and more, those moments became opportunities for something else. A chance to share laughter, quiet glances, and those long, lingering pauses that spoke volumes without words. Margaret knew she was beginning to care for him, but fear still gripped her heart. Ethan was so young, so full of promise, while her own life had been shaped by decades of experience, loss, and regret. She felt the weight of that gap between them. The gap that wasn't just about age, but about everything she had lived through. She couldn't help but question if it was even fair to pursue something with him. He deserved someone who could give him everything, not someone who had already lived a full, complicated life. But every time they spoke, every time their eyes met across the room, that fear seemed a little less overpowering. Ethan's presence in her life, once an unexpected disruption, had become a steady comfort. He didn't ask her to change. He only asked her to be open to the idea of living again, of experiencing joy the way he did, with authenticity and hope. One afternoon, as they walked out of the building together after another long day, the rain began to fall once more. It wasn't the heavy downpour of the first day they'd met, but a light, steady rain that seemed to carry with it a promise of something new. Ethan stopped in his tracks and turned to Margaret. "I've been wanting to ask you something," he said, his voice gentle but full of sincerity. Margaret looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. "What is it? Would you go out with me? I know I'm younger, and I know you have your doubts, but I can't ignore how I feel about you. I want to know you in every way, Margaret, not just as the CEO, but as the woman who made me believe in love again." The words hung between them in the rain. Margaret's breath caught in her chest. For a moment, everything seemed to blur. The rain, the street, the city. All that remained was Ethan's plea, the vulnerability in his eyes, and her own heart, racing. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, torn between the fears of her past and the possibility of something new. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I could feel this way again, but I'm willing to see where this goes. For once, I want to let myself feel." Ethan's smile was slow, but it carried with it a weight of understanding. He stepped closer, closing the space between them, and in that simple moment, Margaret felt the world shift. The rain fell softly around them, but inside, her heart was no longer heavy. It was lighter than it had been in years. The days that followed their conversation in the rain felt like a quiet, deliberate unfolding. Margaret and Ethan began to spend more time together, not just in the office, but outside it as well. What had once been an uncertain, fragile connection was now something real, something that Margaret couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried to resist it. One evening, Ethan invited her to dinner at a small, cozy restaurant he knew. It was nothing fancy, but there was something in the simplicity of the place that made Margaret feel at ease. As they sat across from each other, the soft glow of candlelight flickering between them, The world outside seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the connection they shared in that moment. Ethan listened intently as Margaret spoke about her early years, her struggles to build the company, and the sacrifices she made to ensure its success. He didn't interrupt, he simply listened. It was a rarity for her to share these personal details, but with him, it felt natural. For the first time in years, she felt like her past wasn't just a burden. It was part of who she was. And Ethan accepted it without hesitation. "You've done so much," Ethan said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think you deserve to be happy now, to find joy, not just in what you've built, but in who you are." His words hit her like a wave, soft and unrelenting. She realized, with a pang of surprise, that she hadn't truly thought about what happiness could look like outside of her work. She had defined herself by her achievements, by her role as CEO, but now she was beginning to understand that there could be more. She could be more. As they walked out of the restaurant later that night, the streets were quiet, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Margaret felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. Ethan was there, not just as a colleague or a friend, but as someone who had become essential to her life in a way she hadn't expected. She didn't know where this journey would take them, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step. Ethan reached for her hand as they walked down the street, his grip warm and reassuring. Margaret hesitated for a moment before her fingers intertwined with his. The simplicity of the gesture felt like a declaration, one that said she was ready to embrace something new, something unexpected. For the first time in years, Margaret felt the spark of possibility, and she knew, deep down, that it wasn't just about love, it was about living again. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. As the weeks passed, Margaret found herself facing a new reality. Her relationship with Ethan was growing, not in the explosive way that romance movies often promised, but in a steady, quiet evolution. It was grounded in respect, honesty, and a deep understanding of each other's lives and pasts. However, the more their connection deepened, the more Margaret realized just how much she had to lose. Ethan was no longer just someone she worked with, someone who made her laugh or brought her unexpected joy. He had become someone she trusted. And with trust came vulnerability. Margaret had never allowed herself to be vulnerable. She had spent her life building walls, keeping people at a distance to protect herself from the pain of loss. But Ethan had shown her that vulnerability didn't have to be a weakness. In his presence, she didn't feel small or fragile. She felt strong in a different way, like she could be her true self, without the armor she'd worn for so long. Still, as much as she wanted to believe in their relationship, there was a lingering fear in the back of her mind. What if Ethan's feelings for her were temporary? What if he would eventually outgrow her, as people often did with those who had lived through so much? Margaret tried to push these thoughts away, but they resurfaced one evening when she overheard a conversation between Ethan and a colleague in the office. The words weren't meant for her, but they hit her nonetheless. "He's so much older than you," the colleague said, his tone low. "Don't you think that's a lot to take on? I mean, she's great and all, but she's been through so much. Is this really what you want?" Margaret's heart sank as she overheard Ethan's response. "I don't care about age. I care about who she is. I care about what she's given to the world and what she's still capable of giving. I'm not afraid of her past. I want to be part of her future." Ethan's words were like a balm to her wounded heart, but they also made her realize something. He was stepping into a world she had kept hidden for so long. Her fears, her scars, her doubts, they were all things Ethan was slowly becoming a part of. It was a beautiful thing, yes, but also terrifying. That night after dinner, Margaret found herself unable to sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the weight of her emotions. Ethan had shown her kindness and patience, but was she ready to let go of her fear and allow him fully into her world? Was she ready to trust him with the pieces of her heart she had spent years hiding? In the quiet of the night, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would talk to Ethan. She would share her fears, her doubts, and her feelings. It was time to take another step, to open up in a way she had never allowed herself to before. The next morning, Margaret found Ethan in the office, working quietly at his desk. As she approached, he looked up, and his smile warmed her heart. But today, she couldn't smile back. Today, she needed to be honest. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling just slightly, "I need to talk to you." Ethan's brow furrowed with concern as he stood up, walking toward Margaret. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with curiosity. Margaret took a deep breath, gathering the courage she had never known she needed before. She had been so focused on protecting herself, on keeping everything neat and in control. But now, for the first time, she realized that, in order to move forward, she had to let go of that control. "I overheard something yesterday," she began, the words heavy in the air between them. "And I've been thinking about it ever since." Ethan's face paled slightly, as if he was bracing for something difficult, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "It's not just about the age difference between us," Margaret said, her voice trembling as she chose her words carefully. "I've spent my whole life building walls around my heart. I convinced myself that love was something I had lost forever. And now I find myself feeling vulnerable. And I don't know how to handle that. I don't know how to let someone in. But I need to understand. Are you sure you want this? Are you sure you want to be part of my world?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her face, reading the vulnerability that she rarely allowed anyone to see. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His hand reached out, touching hers gently. "Margaret," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity, "I'm not afraid of your past. I'm not afraid of the person you've become or the things you've been through. I'm here because I see you, really see you. I don't care about the age difference or the scars you carry. What matters to me is the person you are now. And I want to be with you, not because of what you've built or what you've lost, but because of who you are right now." Margaret felt a wave of emotion wash over her, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was relief. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until they were spoken. She had spent so long doubting her worth, questioning whether anyone could love her for who she truly was, not the title she carried or the success she had achieved. But Ethan's words made her believe, even if just for a moment, that love didn't need to be perfect or uncomplicated. It just needed to be real. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Ethan reached up, gently wiping it away. "You're not alone in this," he whispered. "We're in this together, and I'll be here, no matter what." Margaret's heart swelled with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Trust. Trust in someone else, trust in herself, and most importantly, trust in the possibility of a future where love could still be part of the equation. For the first time, she felt the weight of her walls crumbling, not because she was losing herself, but because she was letting herself live fully, without the chains of fear and doubt that had held her back for so long. She smiled softly, her heart finally feeling lighter. "Thank you, Ethan. I needed to hear that." He smiled back, the warmth in his eyes making her heart race. "I'm glad, and I meant every word." In the days that followed, Margaret and Ethan's bond grew even stronger. The conversation they had shared, the unspoken understanding that had passed between them, had laid the foundation for something new, something that neither of them had expected. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of uncertainty, times when old fears resurfaced, but they faced them together, with patience and openness. For Margaret, it was a new kind of challenge. She was learning how to balance her work, her role as CEO, with her growing feelings for Ethan. At first, it felt overwhelming, trying to navigate both worlds at once. But as she spent more time with him, she realized how much he brought to her life, not just as a companion, but as someone who made her feel seen, heard, and valued in a way no one else had. One evening, as the sun began to set, Margaret found herself standing in front of her office window, looking out over the city. She had just wrapped up another round of meetings, but her mind kept returning to Ethan, his smile, his presence, how he made her feel like she was more than just the person who ran a billion-dollar company. She felt like she mattered for who she was, beyond any title or legacy. Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her from her reverie. "Margaret?" She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression soft but intent. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers in his hand, an unexpected but charming gesture. Her heart skipped a beat. "I thought you might like these," he said with a shy smile, handing them to her. Margaret took the flowers, her fingers brushing his as she did. "You always know how to make me smile," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze steady. "I've been thinking," he began, a little hesitant. "We've both taken a lot of steps, and I know it's not always easy, but maybe it's time for us to take another one. Together. I want to do this right, Margaret. I don't want to hide or pretend. I want the world to know how I feel about you." Margaret's heart surged at his words. She had spent so many years keeping her feelings buried, so many years believing that love was something that had passed her by. But now, standing in front of Ethan, she realized that love wasn't a thing of the past. It was something she was living in the present, something that was unfolding before her, day by day. She smiled, her heart full, and took a step toward him. "I want that too, Ethan. I want to take that leap with you. I don't know where it'll take us, but for the first time, I'm ready to find out." Ethan's smile widened, and he gently cupped her face in his hands. "We'll take it one step at a time, together." In that moment, Margaret felt a sense of peace wash over her. The fears, the doubts, the hesitation, they were still there, but they didn't hold the same weight anymore. With Ethan by her side, she was ready to step into the unknown, to embrace a love that had once seemed impossible. As they stood there, the city lights twinkling outside and the soft glow of the sunset casting a warm light on them both, Margaret realized that love, no matter how late, was always worth the leap. As Margaret looked out at the city, the weight of her journey settled within her, no longer defined by loss, but by love rediscovered. In the years of quiet, she had built walls, only to find that love could still find a way in, no matter how much time had passed. Her story reminds us that it's never too late to take a leap, to open our hearts, and to live in the present, no matter where we've been. Love, in its own time, shapes us, heals us, and leads us to unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Margaret Holloway's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Margaret Holloway's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.